Hello, everyone. We are here with Kevin Gostola, who is reporting from London from day 2 of the Assange extradition hearing. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on today, how you're doing? What's the update?
Today was a little bit less hectic. It wasn't the first day, so we had less journalists. There was more space. I can just say from doing the work that I did that it was a lot easier, but then that also comes at a cost because there are people who yesterday stuck around, heard the allegations that Julian Assange was responsible for putting lives at risk, and then today we get to hear from the defense multiple examples of how that's not exactly true, or how that's even worse, false, just plain false. And those journalists are missing. And unfortunately, the public around the world will not be getting that information. So I understand that there's a lot of things happening in the world right now. Coronavirus outbreak. We had German journalists here that had to leave and go back to their country because there was a far-right terrorism attack in Germany. There's the Democratic primary. Everyone's in the thick of that in the United States. And then Harvey Weinstein's trial pushed the Assange hearing out of the news yesterday as well, the verdict in that case. But needless to say, I'm here, and the developments today that were of great importance were that the defense stepped into the courtroom and made several arguments related to abuse of process. It's called Sakruski, and it's case law, and it relates to abuse of process in extradition cases. So something that defense attorneys can turn to say that the charges as alleged are not fair, are not accurate, are not representative of what truly happened in the course of events. And so the argument throughout the morning by the defense, as well as in the afternoon, was essentially that the prosecution has manipulated reality to create their own indictment, to create the superseding indictment, and their chronology does not match up with what truly happened. And in their allegation that, again, the allegation being that Assange solicited information from Private Chelsea Manning, in making that allegation, it just doesn't line up. It just doesn't square. And specifically, we're talking about the most wanted leaks list that appeared on the website in 2009, this collaborative list that was something representative of what journalists, human rights activists, people who are part of non-government organizations, these individuals wanted those documents to be exposed. These were concealed documents that governments have tried to keep secret, including materials in the U.S. And this list is something that the U.S. government has seized upon as evidence that WikiLeaks was soliciting information, and then basically they contend that Chelsea Manning responded to this solicitation. And so the defense meticulously went through the sets of documents and showed how the timeline just does not match up. And there are a couple key points to make about that. First off, I would say to people who are watching that Chelsea Manning deserves an enormous amount of respect, an enormous amount of admiration for what she's done. If you're a attorney for Assange, if you're a Julian Assange supporter, you have to really take a moment to appreciate the sacrifice that she's made, because in making this sacrifice, it has made it possible for the Assange legal team to make the kind of case that they're making in this extradition hearing. Because at this moment, there is nothing the prosecutors have to undermine her statement to the court in 2013. And of course, that's why they wanted to subpoena her to testify before the grand jury. They want to impeach the statement that she made. They want to undermine what was said about the course of events, about how she chose certain sets of materials and why she released them. And having this timeline out there that contradicts what the prosecutors have alleged about Julian Assange, and because it has some credibility since it was given in a court-martial, the prosecutors are kind of jammed. They have to overcome the fact that most people who understand this case understand it from the point of view of what Chelsea Manning said she did. And so there's that. There is that very mere fact that at the end of court today, the end of proceedings, the prosecutor was saying that this is not an unimpeachable statement. It's a self-serving statement. It comes from a co-conspirator, somebody who has been trying to consistently help Julian Assange, was the words of the prosecutor. And obviously, this is derogatory. This is meant to say that she has a bias and she's trying to just help a criminal out and enable him not to face justice. And in fact, mind-bogglingly, as I said at the end of the day, the prosecutor stood before the judge and said that all of the evidence she just heard about abusive process was innuendo, and that basically these statements about the most wanted leaks list did not matter because they are just making a general allegation. They claimed that in the indictment, in the general allegation part of the indictment, they included the most wanted leaks list. And that was meant to make a general statement about the WikiLeaks website and how it functions to solicit leaks. But they suggested, and I can't even believe this. This is just unfathomable to me that they could do this and keep a straight face. They suggested that they have not been suggesting outright that Chelsea Manning read the most wanted leaks list and then used it as a guide, as a roadmap for what to leak. We know from the court-martial against Chelsea Manning that this did not stand up in a military court. David Coombs, her military attorney, made several statements that shot down any attempt, any effort by military prosecutors to make this a part of the narrative of their case. And this failed narrative is now being used by the prosecutors here, and they've hit a brick wall. And in hitting a brick wall, they're now saying something that makes absolutely no sense, because if you go through the affidavit, which I'll do later on tonight in a post, I'll meticulously show that inside this indictment, that shows exactly what they're trying to say Assange did to solicit Manning. They are making specific allegations related to specific sets of documents and saying that the most wanted leaks list played a role. And they're using this because they need it in order to create this clear idea that Assange was soliciting. I'll say that again. Without the most wanted leaks list, it becomes much more difficult for them to suggest that Assange is engaged in solicitation. They are saying that Chelsea Manning read this most wanted leaks list, saw a laundry list of documents that WikiLeaks would like to have, and then she went to work getting those documents. The problem is, and I've written about this previously, and I was sharing a post that I did last year, if you go through the claims of the US government, there's just nothing to back up this idea that she was using the most wanted leaks list. And I'd say that was the big thing for today. The big thing for today was that, as argued in the extradition request, there are claims and allegations that simply do not fit the facts of what unfolded in Chelsea Manning's case, but also in the case of Julian Assange.
Thank you, Kevin. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you what is coming up next for people. What can they expect? Before I did that, I wanted to, know if there was anything else that stood out, either from your live thread. I know that that's the big picture issue today. Was there anything else that came up in the course of today that you think people should know about? And otherwise, like you said, I think we can wait for your report tonight for the nitty-gritty details on what you're saying.
The other important aspect to highlight is that there were multiple examples given by the defense where Julian Assange did care about what would happen to informants or confidential human sources or people who were activists if information was exposed. The cables, there was an amazing sequence in the court proceedings today where we heard the whole timeline laid out, where David Lee and Luke Harding of The Guardian were responsible for publishing the password to encrypted, unredacted cables, a whole entire cache that was up on a mirrored WikiLeaks website. Nobody was able to access it without the password. The password was published in a book, again, written by Luke Harding and David Lee, who worked for the Guardian. Guardian was a partner of WikiLeaks. We all know the story. This relationship between both of them, WikiLeaks and Guardian, soured. And over time, people on the internet began to put two and two together. And by August, you had German newspapers, particularly Der Freitag, who had figured out how to crack this and had the key and were getting into the database. And they went inside the database and they were able to look at all of these materials. They had access to the unredacted cables. And inside these unredacted cables, all of the names of these people who the U.S. government claims about endangering, they were still named. And so, it's important for you to understand that Julian Assange called the State Department, and the State Department, he wanted to warn the State Department that these cables were going to be published all over the internet and they needed to do something. And he actually complained. He said, I don't think you recognize how much of an emergency this is, that we have to do something about this. He was trying to get through. I think he even wanted to contact and speak with Hillary Clinton, that he and Sarah Harrison were trying to talk to anyone higher up in the State Department to communicate the risk at hand. You also had the UN ambassador to the UK, I believe, who was contacted by Julian Assange or WikiLeaks and informed that this was going to get really bad, that there are individuals in these cables whose identities were going to be exposed. Harm minimization steps had not been taken yet for those people. And so something had to be done. And by the way, we know you have a program that's intended to help protect these people in this kind of a situation. Can you start that program? Is there anything you can do to try to help these people? There's evidence from Der Spiegel journalist who has provided expert testimony that some of the security protocols for the information were so intense, in fact, more intense than any other time that he had worked with other journalists. They were using cryptophones. They were using state-of-the-art encryption capabilities. They were going as far as they could to try to protect the identities of people and protect this information so it didn't end up being published somewhere on the internet before WikiLeaks was able to get it out through the media partners and then through their own website. And so this just defies everything that we're being told by the prosecution in terms of how reckless they believe Julian Assange was. The criminality, the kind of picture they want to paint of Julian Assange, it doesn't exist if this is what we all understand from the defense. And so these details do not make it into the extradition request. Although there might be crimes that they could accuse Julian Assange of, even if we all knew this. We know that with this as part of the storyline, he becomes a journalist instead of a hacker. And the way that they argue the indictment, they want us to treat him like a hacker who has an axe to grind against the United States, who's anti-American. And simply as you go through and hear these different statements from the defense, you come away with this recognition that Julian Assange, in fact, did care about the people who were named in these documents. Even in the war logs, they had a step that involved removing names and replacing those names with just blank spaces or a bunch of X's to signify that they had actually gone through and done a redaction process on the documents. And the defense claimed that in some cases, they were more careful with these documents than the Pentagon might have been. I didn't see any specific examples, but I found that to be a fascinating claim to make before the judge, because once again, as you bring this case against the U.S., as the U.S. government brings this case against Julian Assange, you have to think about how all of this is being brought forward and how the U.S. government may or may not be doing this in bad faith. And then when you get a complete picture of everything, you see that they're cherry picking of the details by not including what the U.S. government did or did not do is intended to make them look like everything that they've been doing was just completely legitimate.
Thank you. Yeah, that certainly flies in the face of what we've heard from media and political figures over the years, that Assange couldn't possibly be, and WikiLeaks couldn't possibly be journalists because all they do is just indiscriminately dump information on the internet. So I think that is an extremely important thing for you to point out. Um, Unless there's anything else that you want to pull out from today, I would love if you could tell people, what they can expect in day 3 as you wrap up here.
Yeah, I'd like to wrap and tell everybody that tomorrow they're going to probably be discussing the issues of political offenses and what are political offenses under the treaty and what aren't, and deliberating over treaty issues. That appears to be where we're going at in the next phase here. I did not expect them to go into abusive process issues as extensively as they did today. And so, in fact, we're getting to what I think was going to be a big focus of this week, which is dealing with some of these matters related to the US-UK extradition treaty and what is permissible as far as what you can charge someone with and extradite them, etc., etc. So I want to thank everyone for following my work. I really appreciate you all. I appreciate people who are giving me feedback on Twitter, reacting to the postings throughout the day. And again, I also have tremendous gratitude for anyone who is encouraging others to see my work while I'm here in London. There's a lot that I'm trying to do in order to keep people informed. And so I close again with a very direct and pitch, just to ask you very nicely, if you like what you're seeing, if you like what you're hearing, if you really are enjoying this work and you want more of it, it costs, it's kind of expensive. We're not a legacy media organization, so we can't absorb this as easily as other organizations. As an independent media organization, we do take a hit having me here in London to cover what's happening with Assange's proceedings. And so I would be appreciative if you had a 1, 2, 3, any small amount of dollars just to give to shadowproof.com so that we can defray the costs of what it takes for me to be here. We're talking about lodging, we're talking about flying here to the UK, and we're talking about the trips that I'm taking on a daily basis to and from the hotel and the courthouse in order to be here every morning to give you the best and most reliable reporting. So with that, again, I say thank you, and I appreciate hearing from all of you, and I'm glad that there are so many of you who are following this case. There are many, many things out there in our world right now for you to be following on a daily basis. And the fact that you're spending some of your day following my reporting from the Assange case not only makes me appreciative that you care about my journalism, but also I'm glad that you recognize the threat that this case poses to journalists, and then also to the whole concept of freedom of expression, the whole concept of freedom of speech, and everything that matters in the United States, but also around the world, because we're talking about human rights here. This case implicates all of our human rights, and that's why it's so critical to follow what's happening with this Assange case.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm so glad you're there. I think that's a great place to leave it. Please follow Kevin if you're not yet. His Twitter handle is right there on the screen, @kgustola, and we appreciate everyone's support and attention. Thank you so much, Kevin. We'll be in touch.